Good afternoon. I think we'd like to call the meeting to order just now. My name is Lynn Sainamore. I am serving as the Internet Governance Forum Multi-stakeholder Advisory Group Chair, or IGF MAG Chair. My role here this afternoon is very simple and very short. I am to introduce the chair of the session. I'm here, Mr. Frank Guter, who is the Ambassador and Head of the Division for Security Policy and the Director of Political Affairs from the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs for Switzerland. I will turn the meeting over to him in just a moment to chair, but I'd also like to take a moment and introduce the two MAG members who have actually organized this session on behalf of the MAG, and that's Juan Fernandez and Shagun Olagubil, and they will be driving the input from all of the panelists. So thank you very much, and Mr. Guter, you have the floor.
Lynn, thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all participants as well as the organizers of this session. Welcome to Geneva and welcome to the IGF. It's great to have you all here, especially when considering that we have a stiff competition by other panels taking place right now in the building. And this session is somewhat like a small IGF. We have an impressive list of high-level speakers from different sectors, which will look at cybersecurity issues from many different viewpoints. This year, I have attended various international events where we discussed cybersecurity. Usually, these discussions have a strong participation of government representatives. And with this comes a certain risk of groupthink. In such settings, it is sometimes hard to think out of the box and to move the debate really forward. And it's difficult to find practical and innovative solutions to the very complex challenges that we are facing in the arena of cybersecurity at the global level. So what can be useful and what is useful is to get a different perspective and, of course, fresh ideas. And in this regard, this session is very promising. Next to my colleagues from different governments from all around the world, we have representatives from the private sector, civil society, the technical community, and academia present here today. And this is, in my view, one of the advantages of the IGF, bringing together all stakeholders to discuss on an equal footing. And Geneva is a good place to facilitate such an exchange. It is a city where an astonishing number of experts working on many different aspects of digitalization are present. And these are all ideal ingredients for breaking the silos and engaging in transnational and cross-sectorial dialogue. And I am confident that this very diverse panel will allow for inspirational ideas and new impetus to our efforts in the global cooperation in cyberspace. I'm therefore very much looking forward to all your interventions and questions and wish us all a fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm to give a summary of the session, and I would like to give just an overview, and it has to do with the fact that since the inception of the Internet Governance Forum, cybersecurity has been one of the key areas of concern and discussions. And with the internet community stakeholders expressing various issues and grave concerns about the future of the internet, its values for development, peace, and preservation of our mutual interests in the cyberspace. The Global Economic and Development Agenda as enshrined in the resolution adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations in 2015, Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, continue to be under a serious threat for being achieved if the global actors decline to shape into global actions various commitments and ideas on global cooperation on cybersecurity and preservation of the stabilities of the internet. The existence of critical global cybersecurity issues have underscored the urgent need for a renewed multi-stakeholder dialogue on the security of cyberspace for peace and sustainable development. However, there have been various institutional frameworks for dealing with corporations on cybersecurity, which are operating in silos and are yet to be translated into a meaningful global course of actions. It is therefore expected that the IGF mid-session on cybersecurity will contribute to a global multi-stakeholders dialogue stream that empowers global cooperation on cybersecurity for sustainable development and peace. Furthermore, we're going to share ideas. We're going to discuss and dialogue on how we can stimulate a process that could empower various institutional frameworks. Thank you. May I now invite Mr. Martins, the chairman, the director of the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams, to give us, I have a question posed for you. In the context of what I've just read, the Best Practices Forum on Cybersecurity, organized within the IGF this year, focused on identifying how cybersecurity can help reduce or achieve, the sustainable development goals. What ties did the group establish between cybersecurity and development?
Thank you. And first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here today. During the Best Practices Forum this year, we aligned ourselves with the effort Connecting and Enabling the Next Billion, which previously investigated policy options to help drive the growth of ICT technologies and how they can support achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We did so by initiating a wide call for comments, to which we received a total of 27 formal submissions. Discussions took place on our mailing list and in a total of 9 additional meetings. Key outcomes included that it is clear that well-developed cybersecurity can increase trust in ICTs and the internet and ensure robust interactions and transactions. It also helps stimulate growth in the technology, which helps accelerate business and ensures technologies critical to achieving the SDGs can be meaningfully developed. On the other side of that coin, though, if we fail to make the correct investments and fail to make the right decisions, we can create a perception of insecurity that generates distrust in the technologies and limits our ability to achieve those sustainable development goals. As part of our work, we developed a concrete set of 10 areas where development of appropriate policies ensures that we end up in a place where security is actively supporting development. These ranged from securing the reliability of and access to internet services over ensuring that systems are in place to avoid potential abuse by authorities, to the development and promotion of secure development processes. As just one small example, small businesses have been key to driving access to decent work and improve economic growth, which is SDG 8. The Best Practices Forum identified the need to help promote technologies for small and medium enterprises to secure themselves from attack and which promote confidence and trust in their services. A brief risk assessment that we did flagged how vulnerable these organizations are and how their access to security technologies can be limited based on the country they're based in and their access to relevant security expertise. They also tend to be highly reliant on third-party systems such as mobile payment systems. A big challenge that we see ahead is in defining and identifying stakeholder responsibilities. We noticed that security issues have become increasingly complex and systemic. Only reinforced cross-stakeholder group cooperation and multi-stakeholder approaches will be able to confront and withstand future challenges. There is a concern that siloed action by a single stakeholder group can lead to ineffective and even counterproductive solutions. No single stakeholder can go it alone. Developing a culture of cybersecurity that involves a mix of core shared values, norms, and a really good understanding of each other's responsibilities will be critical to further developing cybersecurity in a way that will actually allow us to promote the growth of ICTs and their support for development. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And following this line of the link of cybersecurity with development, we are happy to have here Anita Gurumurthy, the Executive Director of IT for Change, that is a civil society organization in India. So, Anita, what can a development-centered framework for cybersecurity could be?
Thank you very much. I may not be an expert in cybersecurity, but I think I know something about human well-being. This I take as an important starting point for my thoughts on what a development-centered framework for cybersecurity could be. In the 1990s, the concept of human security was constructed by a broad coalition of development actors. UNDP's Human Development Report 1994 describes human security as, and I quote, safety from chronic threats such as hunger, disease, and repression, and protection from sudden and hurtful disruptions in the patterns of daily life, whether in homes, in jobs, or in communities. Human security incorporates all threats which individuals come across during their daily lives and integrates the principles of freedom from fear, such as war-related violence, and freedom from want, such as poverty and underdevelopment. From the mid-90s to now, thinking around human well-being and security has moved one more step. With geopolitical tensions and flux in global institutional rule-making, climate change, and technology's unstoppable juggernaut, it seems that human well-being and security requires a whole-of-planet approach. Digital technologies seem to have a rather interesting relationship to human well-being and security. They are the harbingers of information and knowledge, but paradoxically, they also fuel new fears, fear of crime, violence, and war, and usher in new threats to the planet, drawing upon material resources and contributing in huge measure to waste. The differential power of actors in cyberspace creates not only a new challenge in terms of the lack of data capital and capability in low-income countries, it legitimizes the use of digital technologies by certain countries as a new instrument to pursue their national security interests. For more than a decade now, scholars have pointed to the subversion of the human security framework to use development aid as an instrument to pursue national security interests. Today, from the sale of innocuous IoT devices to software and digital expertise to manage elections, a new securitization of development is emerging. The human being, whose well-being is at stake, is also beholden today in the access for data regime to big corporations who need well-connected human societies for sustenance and survival. Their stakes in the well-being of the network and keeping it global are self-evident. The irony here is that the sustenance of the cyber is itself being framed by the race for power, geopolitical and geoeconomic, in the name of national security and global market control. Can there be a framework of cyber sustainability inspired by what the Agenda 2030 of the SDGs calls universal peace in larger freedom? The shift to cyber sustainability as if people and the planet matter comprises the development answer to the cybersecurity conundrum. So, from ensuring that cyberspace is free from weaponization to linking data security with data ownership frameworks and tackling threats to information integrity, a new framework of cyber sustainability entails a wide gamut of action points. And here, I'd like to close by saying that as technologies are increasingly being used to surveil, close spaces, to intimidate, and to silence, a global civic space emergency has emerged. An urgent global compact on cyber sustainability is in order, and people and civil society organizations must claim the contours of such an agreement. Hopefully, its preamble will be as follows. This is a plan of action for people, planet, and prosperity. It also seeks to strengthen universal peace in larger freedom. We are resolved to free the human race from the tyranny of poverty and want and to heal and secure the planet. In case you think that sounds a bit familiar, yes, you're right. I'm plagiarizing from the Agenda 2030 document's preamble. Our motivations for cyber sustainability cannot but be the same as those that power our vision for sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, moving from there, because I know that we have, I hope we can gain a little bit of time from next speaker. May I call on Valeria Daintecourt, the Manager, Communication and Information Policy Program, Association for Progressive Communications. I repeat, Association for Progressive Communication, APC. from the civil society stakeholders group. Now, may I ask you, in the context of the theme of this section, why is cybersecurity a human rights issue?
The response is relatively simple. Cybersecurity is a human rights issue because in the end, and most importantly, it is about people, both online and offline. There is no difference between security and cybersecurity, and it should be multidimensional with human at the center. So when talking about security, we must ask, security for who? The dominant narrative that pits human rights against cybersecurity must be dislodged, because cybersecurity and human rights are not only synergistic, but are also deeply interrelated, interdependent, and mutually reinforcing. So overlooking those connections is resulting in human rights abuses contained in cybersecurity policies and actions, and in an exacerbated securitization of the internet. So examples of this include massive and indiscriminate surveillance. It also includes the deepening of surveillance capitalism, censorship and filtering, intimidation and silencing of voices, internet shutdowns, disruption of access to or dissemination of information online, personal data harvested and classified. So apart from asking ourselves security for who, we should also question for what and by what means. So what happens when the state itself becomes the source of insecurity? The solution is not to increase the power of states to control, monitor, censor the online space, and to intercept communications and activities on the internet, or even worse, to transfer those powers to private corporations. The solution is not also to adopt measures to criminalize the online activity of civil society groups, activists, bloggers, human rights defenders, journalists, and others for exercising rights online. Women, girls, LGBT, minorities are the least secure, so those responses expose people to greater insecurity. So there is the need then to overcome the perception that cybersecurity is about the technology, and there is the need to challenge those approaches to cybersecurity that reinforce the status quo and benefit particular political or corporate interests to the detriment of people's rights and security. For addressing the core purposes of cybersecurity, we need internet public policies with clear purposes, with human rights embedded in them. We also need a strong accountability, scrutiny, public debate, and transparency mechanisms for political and corporate powers. Finally, if we want security of the cyberspace for peace and sustainable development, it is important not to forget that the internet is a global resource that should be governed in the public interest, and it cannot happen effectively without the truly multi-stakeholder dialogue, cooperation, and collaboration. The voices, perspectives, expertise, and experience of civil society and the technical community are essential to build trust, confidence, and security in the cyberspace and cannot be excluded. No one stakeholder alone can address cybersecurity issues effectively, and there is the need for all stakeholders to work together at all levels to ensure that cybersecurity policies and strategies are human rights respecting by design. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, looking at it from the African perspective, I would like to call on the chairman, African Information Technology, African Information and Communication Technology Alliance, AFICTA, and the person of Dr. Jameson Olufuye. There is an important question being put here, which is part of one of the key questions. As perhaps the weakest link in the cybersecurity nexus, how can developing countries enhance global cooperation on cybersecurity for sustainable development and peace?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Segun. I want to thank again the moderators, Segun and Johan, for organizing this very relevant session. And good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Well, the the hottest topic in the world today is perhaps cybersecurity, given many cases of high-level breaches of top-level organizations with loss of data and cyber attacks and crimes of high proportion. This has the potential of plunging the world into disorder and the eroding of confidence in the global internet economy, through which many nations are taking their people out of poverty. If the issue of cybersecurity is not properly addressed with peaceful coexistence in mind, the sustainable development goal could be impaired. Therefore, it is in the self-interest of we from developing countries to be proactive in any dialogue that foster cooperation on the issue of deepening enterprise security. Now, Segun, to answer specifically your question, I will submit that developing countries will be taking the issues of cybersecurity seriously and enhancing global cooperation when, one, they have cybersecurity strategy, policy, and law in place in their countries. I'm proud to say that Nigeria has such a framework in place. Number two, that they ratified the African Union Convention on Cybersecurity and Data Protection. At the last African IGF, we got feedback from African Union that only 2 countries out of the 54 countries in Africa have ratified the document. So I would like to use the opportunity to encourage all countries in Africa to ratify this. Number 3, they need to create awareness among their citizens of the ramifications of the cybersecurity instrument. And number 4, with regard to what they need to do, there is need to encourage sub-regional and regional cooperation. African Union Commission is doing a lot in this regard, as you can see with the instrument that's come into play. And the sub-regional organization, the ECOWAS, the ECA, and the Southern African Development Corporation, need to come together more, like the One Network program that we have in East Africa. It is helping business a lot and fostering cooperation. And they need to ensure participation at global fora like this, one either by physical presence or through remote communication facility, as we could see. There is need to ensure that their voices are heard and opinion considered. In fact, I would like to say that AFICTA was founded in 2012 because of the need for private sector voices to be heard at a forum like this, and that there is aggressive monitoring and evaluation and feedback mechanism in place and implemented. And finally, building peace through global cooperation on cybersecurity is in the interest of developing nations, and this discussion clearly underscores that imperative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jimson, to put us on some of the challenges of developing countries, and in particular Africa. But we have to take advantage that we have here with us Uchi Mbanaso, that is the Executive Director of the Center for Cyberspace Study of the Nasarawa State University in Kefi, Nigeria. And I want if Mr. Mbanaso can widen us what are the of these African challenges, but especially what are the research challenges with regard to cybersecurity on Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this wonderful invitation to be part of this global discussion on cybersecurity. I will start by saying that cyberspace threats are significant and affect indiscriminately. In other words, Africa cannot be isolated from the potential damage of threats. However, Africa is burdened with fragmented and insufficiently secure infrastructure. Investment is very low in the area of cybersecurity, especially in capacity development. However, there is an upsurge in digitalization and migration, and internet penetration is growing very high. This has potential of making Africa a soft target for cyber criminals. There is also the issue of general perception of cybersecurity across all tiers of stakeholders, unaware of the potential dangers across the board. However, research and development is at the low ebb. Most academicians are yet to come to reality that cybersecurity is multidisciplinary and requiring research input from all cadres of discipline. And I require that Africa needs coordinated, focused research that is driven by partnership, where government, industry, and academia is working together to chart the course in Africa. Having said that, research in Africa is currently undermined by poor funding, especially occasioned by poor perception of the potential dangers. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. We end the first section of the session. So we open now. We have some minutes to take some questions from the floor. I don't know if we have some remote questions as well. And so let's play. Please, can you say one of the remote questions, and then from the floor we'll take all the questions, and then the panelists will volunteer who wants to answer those questions. So please.
So we have Yusani Borgs waiting to reply. Yusani, are you ready?
Yes. Hello?
You raise your hand. Please speak.
Okay. There has been talk about the contribution that developing countries should make to global cybersecurity and norms, but we would like to know what opportunity can the work on global cybersecurity and norms contribute to the developing countries?
Okay, thank you. I don't know if the speakers heard the question correctly. It's been said that the developing country has to contribute to cybersecurity, but he's asking what the developing country will receive for all this. Let's take all the questions first, and then we'll respond it one by one. From the floor, somebody has a question from the floor here in the room? No question? Do we have some other from there? Okay, so this is the only question we have right now. So who from the speakers will want to take it? You said, Daniel, you want to take it?
Thank you. My name is Daniel Stauffacher from ICT for Peace Foundation. I think this is a very important question. It is the question of the development dimension of cybersecurity, which I find that we have to address it as well. Of course, norms will help countries, and especially developing countries, to build an infrastructure, build a legal framework, strategies, and so forth to defend against cyber attacks, especially crime and other areas. But these attacks have an enormous impact on development. They have a detrimental impact on development, and that's why we believe this should be treated as a development issue on a priority basis. So I agree with the speaker.
Thank you. We have some minutes, so some other speaker want to respond. Jimson, please.
Indeed, that's a very good question. What can developing countries receive, even when they give? A lot to receive. Let me give you a case in point, like Nigeria, when it comes to ICT generally. Flashback, maybe 15 years ago, was ICT contribution to GDP, maybe about 2%. But right now, in 2017, going to 12%. So our developing countries have a lot to receive when we ensure that our voices are heard and we also engage in the discussion. It is a win-win process. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's provided an important responses to the question being asked. Now, we need to move forward and going to the next question. I would like to invite Brigadier General Mohammed Tanimu Abdullahi from the Presidential Communication Command and Control Center, Nigeria. He's representing the National Security Advisor. And there's a question posed for you, and it has to do with how should government help achieve global cooperation on cybersecurity among different state actors in developing countries.
The opportunity to be here, and we are grateful that you invited Nigerian government to be part of this forum. On our part in Nigeria, I would like to give an instance of what we are doing within our country to ensure cooperation amongst Nigerians to enhance cybersecurity. In Nigeria, government, of course, is responsible for formulating strategies and policies to maintain cyber security. Amongst the policies we have include the Cybercrime Act, which provides comprehensive legal, regulatory, and institutional framework for the prohibition, identification, and punishment of cybercrimes in Nigeria. We also have a cybersecurity policy which documents government position and approach and provide guiding principles towards assessing, securing, and protection of the nation's presence in the cyberspace. It also enlightens the citizens, facilitates national dialogue, and clarify government programs. The Nigerian cybersecurity strategy aggregates government response. In addition to all this, Nigerian government established institutions to implement and actualize these policies and strategies. Some of these institutions include the Nigeria Computer Emergency Response Team. We also have within the various sectors in Nigeria a response team to be able to determine patterns of cyber crime. Nigeria also have the Cybercrime Laboratory for investigating cyber crimes. So having said this, what should government do to ensure cooperation amongst developing countries? I think we need to coordinate. Developing countries have issues with capacity building, so we need to build capacity. Of course, I've mentioned investigation of cyber crimes. And we are part of the Nigeria. We formed in collaboration with multi-stakeholders, we formed the Nigeria Internet Governance Forum. The recommendations from these forums are being implemented by government. All this is in line with our core values and principles. So at the international level, of course, we need to coordinate and collaborate based on the international principles of cooperation and the UN core values. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for mentioning how governments should engage in this process, but also the rest of the stakeholders has to engage in this process. So I want to ask Carmen Gonsalves. She's the head of international cyber policy on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, and also she was the representative of that country in the GGE group that sessioned this last year and this year. So the question is, how can we foster effective participation of civil society, the private actors, the tech community, and academia in the global debate on international peace and security on cyberspace? Thank you, Carmen.
Thank you very much, Juan. That's a great question. But before jumping to the how, I'd like to take a step back and focus first on why it's so important that we aim for multi-stakeholder participation in the global international peace and security in cyberspace debate. it is stating the obvious that only a small part of the worldwide internet infrastructure is government-owned. The private sector owns by far the largest part of it, but that doesn't lessen its importance. Governments, private sector parties, and technical and academic experts all have their respective roles and responsibilities, and as such can and should be included as legitimate participants in the international peace and security discussion. This is why in 2017, the Netherlands government helped to launch the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace, the only international forum where government, industry, technologists, and civil society are joining forces to reach a common goal, a digital future in which the fruits of an open, free, and secure cyberspace are there for all to enjoy. The power of this independent forum is that the members represent all stakeholder groups, and they are, that being said, also from all regions of the world. They represent all stakeholder groups, varying from government parties, academia, civil society organizations focusing on an open, free cyberspace, the technical community, and the private sector. The formidable chair of the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace, Marina Calderant, is among us today and will speak on this plenary later on. Even more than in purely governmental fora and in technical and corporate get-togethers, these commissioners are dependent on one another to reach consensus. In order to do that, they need to be able to truly understand one another's sometimes diverging interests and ideas. The result is that what they come up with has, and hopefully can definitely count on, but I'm very confident that it will, solid backing throughout their respective stakeholder communities. An example of the work of the Global Commission was presented to us recently in Delhi, where in the margins of the Global Conference on Cyberspace, the Commission launched a well-received call to protect the core of the Internet. Vivid proof of the fact that this Commission is providing a valuable contribution to the worldwide debate on international peace and security in cyberspace. And this is only one example of how one could find new venues of introducing the voice of all those who have a real stake in cyberspace into this important discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. But we are happy to have here one representative of civil society, Daniel Stauschaufer, the president of the ICT for Peace Foundation. And I want him that in concrete terms, what in concrete terms the civil society could do to support the norms for a peaceful cyberspace process.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Maybe before I give some examples, allow me to make a few comments on the question of norms and in particular the fate of the GGE report or not report, GGE process. From a civil society point of view, of course, it is unfortunate that there was no conclusion. On the other hand, we have already a great number of norms from the XVII report, which can be implemented at the global and at the regional level and national level. So, and then we also understand, of course, that some interesting points were made in the 2017 process, and I hope that this discussion will continue. So I think it is advisable that, that countries, including those who have been acknowledging the GD recommendation, would now start implement them, the ones we have. One effective way would be to include them in sufficient extent to national cybersecurity legislation and strategies. For instance, having a national cybersecurity strategy is already a norm written into the EU NIS directive, and that practice, having them should be a global norm. At the same time, we are encouraged to see that corporate partners are assuming societal and global responsibility in mitigating the risks, including those that run in the products and systems. And then norms proposed by the ones like Microsoft are interesting, and I understand that governments are looking already at them. Now, in what way can we, civil society, contribute? I think one way is to serve as a test bed and a sounding board to government and industry propositions and research on them and test them. I think that is one area where we could do more, and of course more NGOs could be involved. Then, of course, capacity building, that is something that is very close to our heart, and we have been working with regional organizations like the African Union, Organization of American States, ASEAN, and in particular CLMV countries. And by bringing workshops into the regions, we also learn very much what they think about these norms, countries which are not members of the GGE. Then, of course, we can influence our national governments to adopt these norms and CBMs within our own constituencies. Of course, we need more NGOs to do that. I think it's still a small number that really are interested and have, but that should not prevent us to reach out to others and bring more people into debate to support these efforts by governments. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Now, moving from the civil society to the business sector, United States of America. Now, I want to ask Audrey Plunk. Sorry if I don't pronounce your name right. Now, she's the Senior Director, Global Cybersecurity and Internet Governance Policy, Intel Corporation. Now, what should be the role of the technology industry to keep the internet safe and secure?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. The business sector has many roles to play in the very broad topic of cybersecurity, and we share responsibility with other stakeholders here to sustain a safe, stable, secure, and global and interoperable digital infrastructure. In the interest of time, I will define these roles as building and operating, mitigating and responding, and engaging. At the foundation, business is designing, developing, manufacturing, distributing, and implementing technology. In and of itself, this ecosystem is very diverse. As builders and operators, we have responsibility for designing for security, testing our products and validating them, and working with our customers to understand their needs so that we can build better products and address new and emerging issues. In mitigating and responding, when cybersecurity issues occur, business is one of numerous stakeholders with responsibility for responding to attacks or threats. For equipment vendors and software vendors, this may mean updating products and finding technical solutions, but also working with the broader business community that relies on interconnected systems and networks. And finally, we have a role of engagement. We have an important role to play with this global multi-stakeholder community to both build cybersecurity capacity around the world and to support and engage in discussions on building a more stable and peaceful cyberspace. We believe that this stability is essential for investment, growth, and prosperity for business, and to develop and deliver global and interoperable products and services. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. So now we're going to go to another sector, the intergovernmental organizations and international organizations. We are very pleased to have with us Marco Obiso. He's the cybersecurity coordinator of the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU. So, Mr. Obiso, in your opinion, what is the role of the United Nations and its intergovernmental agencies in the global cooperations on cybersecurity for sustainable development and peace?
Thank you, Juan, and thanks for organizing this session and inviting all of us. I'm going to be different, and I'm going to answer in line with the statement that has been provided rather than reading a statement, because I think this is an interactive panel, so we need to interact. And I have listened to the answers, and you are asking me what is the role of the UN and the IGOs on global cooperation, and almost all speakers say that there is a need to go for global cooperation. This is a discussion that is going GGs 14 years,
Hello?
UN maybe 20 years, civil society 10 years, but still we are discussing here what are the mechanisms, what should be done, what are the measures to be taken. And I see that the questions are always the same, and more or less the answers are always the same. So maybe we should ask ourselves why this is not happening, rather than try to identify what are the measures to be taken. There was a mention of multi-stakeholder, and now you're asking me the role of the UN. Well, UN is multi-stakeholder, but the representation of the UN is member states. And here there is a contradiction in terms, because if we want to have a multi-stakeholder dialogue that is beneficial and concrete in terms of actions, we need to redefine how this multi-stakeholder dialogue is happening. Now, IGF, for example, is a great platform, but it's not a decision-making platform. It's a great platform for discussion, but then at the end of the day, the decision taken here or the outcomes are not something that some member states are taking into consideration as a binding measure. So one of the fundamental questions here is that while there are so many initiatives and so many, and I'll keep the time, and so many, let's say, already measures like confidence building measure, like norms and principles, if there is no consensus at the global level that this should be binding or should kind of oblige the member state to respect them and to apply them, then, you know, they will carry on to be voluntary. And the nature of voluntary means that some countries will adopt them and some countries may not adopt them. So, coming back to the role of the UN can facilitate this process, can facilitate this dialogue, and moreover can actually try to get member states agreeing on the fact that all this multi-stakeholder dialogue has to be brought to the attention of the member state in order for the UN, which is at the end of the day is member states, to agree on something that is meaningful. And right now, this is not unfortunately happening. Thank you.
Thank you for emphasizing the need to empower the process. Now, okay, okay. Can I call on the Andriy Kuski, Ambassador at Large, Special Representative of the President of the Russian Federation for International Cooperation in Information Security? What should we do to resume discussion on international information security issues under the UN auspices? And how can we make it more practical and efficient?
Уважаемые коллеги, наш форум – это важная площадка для осознания значимости проблем интернета и в особенности безопасного, невредоносного использования информационно-коммуникационных технологий. К сожалению, за время существования форума ситуация в киберпространстве постоянно только ухудшалась и дестабилизировалась. Форум, к сожалению, об этом только что было сказано, не принимает решения, которые могли бы существенно исправить данную ситуацию, поскольку в основном сосредоточен на рассмотрении социальных и гуманитарных аспектов использования ИКТ. А мир, тем не менее, неуклонно приближается к серьезной киберконфронтации. Количество и качество инцидентов в этой сфере значительно расширяется, а совокупный ущерб экономике приближается к 3 триллионам долларов. Мы как бы не замечаем с вами, что более 130 государств отрабатывает навыки ведения кибервойны. В этих условиях международная дискуссия больше сконцентрирована не на том, как поставить надежный заслон перед кибервойной, а больше рассуждаем по вопросам о применимости международного права. По-моему, это уже риторический вопрос. Ответ на него уже давно известен. конечно, оно применимо? Ответ, к сожалению, только в том, что международное сообщество не определилось, кем, когда и как применяется это международное право. Обратите внимание, если вчера руководитель Microsoft выступил с идеей Женевской киберконвенции, как тут же возникла масса сомневающихся и лиц, которые встали в оппозицию к этому предложению. Но ведь мы должны хорошо себе представлять, что именно из международных конвенций и состоит международное право. Проект такого документа был подготовлен Россией в виде концепции и распространен в международном сообществе для изучения еще в 2011 году. Тем не менее, в этом документе нет ничего ни революционного, ни радикального. Этот документ содержит прагматическое перечисление того, что можно и что нельзя делать в киберпространстве. Его можно взять за основу, это далеко не Библия, но сделать из него, как у нас в России говорят, конфетку, чтобы все понимали, что можно и что нельзя. Чтобы не раскачивать мир на противоположные оппозиционные блоки, известная группа правительственных экспертов ООН по информационной безопасности за годы своей работы практически выработала нормы и принципы ответственного поведения государств в информационном пространстве и определила источники этих угроз. Больше того, там почти достигнут был консенсус о том, чтобы придать этим нормам универсальный характер. К сожалению, по ряду вопросов документ из-за позиции небольшого числа западных стран окончательно принять не удалось. Мы в России считаем, что ООНовский трек в обсуждении вопроса о правилах поведения в киберпространстве главный, ибо только там в ООН формируется ответственность государств за их действия, и поэтому мы намерены активизировать усилия международного сообщества с целью возобновления работы группы правительственных экспертов с более четким мандатом, который в качестве основной цели ее работы сформулирует принципы, нормы и правила ответственного поведения государств в информационном пространстве. Без этого международному сообществу просто не обойтись. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you, Andrei. But besides the United Nations sphere, there's some other processes and forums that are dealing with cybersecurity globally. One of those is the biannual Global Conference on the Cyberspace that began in London in 2011. That's why it's been called the London Process. And we're happy to have here Sarah Taylor, the Director of Cyber, National Security Directorate of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office of the United Kingdom, and also the representative of that country in the GGE. So, Sarah, in your opinion, what role should the London process play toward empowering international cooperation on the security of cyberspace?
And I want to thank also Marco for reminding us that we should be more interactive in this panel. So I'm going to try and pick up on some of the comments that others have said, as well as, of course, answering the question that I have been assigned to. So first of all, on the London process, what I wanted to say was that for us back in 2011, when we kicked it off, the observation that our then Foreign Secretary made was that governments weren't properly engaging in cyber as a strategic issue. And so for us, there were three really important elements of what the London process was designed to do. And the first was to get cybersecurity on the agenda for governments beyond the communications ministries and the regulators who are very properly looking at cybersecurity. Now, I'm a diplomat and I know the danger of being allowed to wander into technical issues unchaperoned, so I'm very grateful for my communications ministry and regulators for helping me. But I also know that increasingly cyber is a matter of strategic importance with international peace and security implications. And that was what our foreign minister at the time wanted to stress. And he wanted to get governments involved at that level in recognizing that. And also he wanted to emphasize and I sort of say this slightly, having thanked Marco, I'm now going to disagree with him slightly, emphasize that cyberspace is not an unregulated environment. One of the key messages of the first London Process Conference was that international law applies online as it applies offline, including the UN Charter in its entirety. We have a set of international law that applies in cyberspace, and starting that conversation about how the application of that law in cyberspace contributes to peace and security is something that the London Process was designed to do. The second thing that we wanted to do through the London Process was challenge government's tendency only to look at cyberspace as a threat. We wanted to emphasize that cybersecurity has no value if you're not clear about what you're securing. And what we wanted to emphasize that we should secure is the benefits that cyberspace brings, the benefits that an open, free, peaceful and secure cyberspace brings, the benefits for development, for prosperity, for freedom of expression, for human rights. All of those economic and social benefits needed to be part of that conversation. And the third thing was ensuring that we were recognizing that the paradigm that has existed around traditional international security debates, where it's governments to governments talking in basements in the UN, as we did in the GGE process, isn't going to solve the problem here. We need to have a much broader conversation with civil society, with industry, about how we're going to tackle that problem. And so the London Process was designed to bring foreign ministers and academia and civil society and industry together to think about how we're going to solve those problems. I think we have come a very long way. We're sitting in the IGF now talking about international security and cybersecurity together in a multi-stakeholder environment. I think that is a testament to the success and the contributions that everybody in this room and more broadly have made to taking that London Process idea and running it forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's quite interesting. Now, I would like to bring in the new Global Commission that has just been recently set up. And let me call the chair of the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace, and the person of Marina Kajuran. Such an interesting woman. You have chaired the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace since 2017, March. What has the Commission done or achieved so far? How do you see the role of the Commission in the context of this session? Thank you.
Recently, I read a report that said that there are about 100 contemporary international discussions about cybersecurity, and the Global Commission is one of them. Here I would like to recognize the Dutch government for their support, and also Carmen for her words about the Commission. What makes the Commission unique, besides its multi-stakeholder approach? Its global nature. All major cyber powers are parts of the Commission, and all parts of the world are represented in the Commission, literally from Berkeley to Beijing. And I would like to recognize two commissioners who are in the room just now. It's Abdul Hakim Ajijola from Nigeria and Elina Noor from Malaysia. The Commission is co-chaired by Michael Chertoff, former Secretary of Homeland Security of the United States, and Lata Reddy, former Deputy National Security Advisor of India, which also shows its geopolitical depth. The mission of the Commission is to enhance international peace, security and stability by proposing norms and recommendations to guide responsible state and non-state behavior in cyberspace. What does it mean? What does it mean in the words that all people understand, not only those who are dealing with cybersecurity on a daily basis? Cyber stability is an ideal state where all stakeholders are free to enjoy the benefits of cyberspace without fear. That's an ideal state. That will not be easy to reach. Our Commission has contributed to that. We contributed to that with our first norm, call to protect the public core of the Internet. You have the text on the table, and it will be distributed also later. I'll read out the text of the norm. Without prejudice to their rights and obligations, states and non-state actors should not conduct or knowingly allow activity that intentionally and substantially damages the general availability of integrity or integrity of the public core of the Internet and therefore the stability of cyberspace. Why did we choose that norm? We choose the public core of the Internet for several reasons. Because of the global reliance on cyberspace of our economies, because of the increasing dependence of other infrastructures on its reliability, because of potentially dramatic consequences of its disruption. This norm is voluntary. It's legally non-binding. But we all know that norms can lay groundwork for binding commitments and can one day crystallize into international law. That's our first norm. We will continue our work. Our website is on the paper that you'll receive. Please read that, and please be back to us, whether with your proposals, with your comments, with your ideas. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Will we be back? Now, the floor is open for question. Okay. Okay. Any other person? Okay, I've seen you. Another person, you. Another person from this side. Okay. So we have 3 people in the hall. Now, Rod, please, can you ask a question? And please, can you identify yourself, your stakeholders group?
Thank you. My name is Walter Natris, and on behalf of several organizations based in the Netherlands, national, regional, and international, I chaired a meeting on last Sunday on strengthened cooperation within the context of the IGF. And I've been hearing so far a lot of forms of cooperation, but we are at the IGF, and everybody except for the Best Practice Forum is focusing on something else, I noticed. What we did, we tapped international multi-stakeholder organizations' ideas about cooperation within the IGF context. And I'm just going to pose a few questions that came from that session, which perhaps we could deliberate a little bit about. For example, is how can we facilitate a process that allows for strategically most important topics and the most urgent issues for each stakeholder, and then combine them with other stakeholders? How can the IGF facilitate focus, inclusion, and commitment from stakeholders within whatever processes it decides to follow? How can the IGF facilitate cooperation on best practices between other platforms and organizations, ensuring connection of dots where the connection is currently missing to add value to current debates and work? We got the example from the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise that invited the IGF best practices and intersessional work to come to their conference and present our best practices, and the other way around, invite them to come to us and present their work to us to learn from each other and build together from there. What sort of sessions, a fora or working group could the IGF actually facilitate? Because what do we actually need to be more efficient? So what is the process that we need to build on? I've got one comment more. And what allows then for the very best topics to be going through that process to ensure success? And I would like to end with our national and regional IGFs. How can the IGF tap into and facilitate the current best practices that are existing in countries already and make sure that they come up to our international forum and that our best practices go back down for others to learn from? And that way, I think the world may actually get a little better when we're talking about cybersecurity and fighting cybercrime. So a lot of questions that will be presented later this year in an official report following this session. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Wout. Before giving the floor again to Segun to take the other questions, I want to inform the audience present here that the next part of the session will be on the challenges and the road ahead. So those questions for the challenges and the future work, we will defer, and we're telling the speakers to answer that at the end of this next session. In this moment, we're answering the questions to have to do with the role of the different stakeholders and the different organizations throughout the world. Having said that, Segun, you have a question from the lady there.
Okay, please, can you identify yourself, your stakeholders group? Please go ahead. Yep.
Sí, muchas gracias. En primer lugar, quisiéramos dar las gracias a los panelistas. Estamos muy contentos por este evento donde vemos la presencia de todas las regiones de expertos, tanto de países del sur como del norte, y también porque vemos representantes tanto de las empresas, de la sociedad civil, del sector gubernamental y de representantes de Naciones Unidas, de la OIT, de la Oficina de Asuntos de Desarme de Naciones Unidas. El comentario era relativo a que observamos hay dos canales o dos lugares donde se debate el tema. Existe el Foro de Gobernanza de Internet, existen las iniciativas regionales, pero lo que nos llama la atención es lo expresado por el señor Obiso de la Unión Internacional de Telecomunicaciones, así como lo expresado por el señor Krusky, la señora Marina, en cuanto a las posibles normas originalmente voluntarias, pero que en algún momento se conviertan en normas vinculantes. En ese sentido, quisiéramos preguntar cómo dentro del marco de Naciones Unidas o dentro del marco de agencias especializadas del sistema de Naciones Unidas pudiéramos identificar posibles normas para proteger la ciberseguridad y que esas normas incluyan aspectos que promuevan el desarrollo sostenible de todos los países. Muchas gracias.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very good question. Any other person? Okay, please go ahead. Your name and your stakeholders group.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jason Meneses. I come from University of Perpignan in France, where I'm doing my doctorate in Hispanics and Latin American Studies. Thank you very much for, to all of you for the presentations. At the moment, I do my research on the emergence of resilience and peace building within childhood affected by war in Colombia, particularly in Chocó Department. In part of my investigation, I'm considering education policies and technology coming out from this, what is called a post-conflict society. And I would like to put some points to be on the table. The first one, I feel very concerned about children's security and their human rights. I mean, they are accessing faster to technology than clean water, for example. Besides that, I think of free personality development, cultural and identity rights, education, and so forth. The first question would be, like, how are you addressing, institutions, associations, governments that are in this moment dealing with this affairs here? How are you dealing with this phenomenon, like considering the advancement in technology and peace building in relation to, childhood, The second point will be related to the impact of these policies, projects, or actions, particularly with vulnerable children and, for sure, these children affected by conflict in developing countries. And the third point I want to make is related to, I'm so sorry, but what are we going to do in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of rights and, in cybersecurity terms, rights, in relation to with presidents and government members using fake news in sustainable development and
Thank you.
Fake news and considering this developing countries in relation to sustainable development and peace.
Okay, are you done? Thank you, thank you. Now let's go back to our speakers, please. Okay. Bishop.
Marco, it's okay.
Okay. Please go ahead.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. And well, I'm happy that I have managed to instigate a little bit of interaction here, because I think that is how the session is supposed to be. And just to be clear, I agree with Sarah. And of course, I don't mean that cyberspace is not regulated. But let me answer to the question from the representative from Cuba in terms of how norms and principles can become bindings. Now, I don't think that we should jump into directly coming out with an international framework that every member state should subscribe. I think that experience shows we are not ready there. But I think that in the back of our mind, that could be might be an option to go, because everyone is seeing that, and even let's say the Global Commission is realizing that you can come out with the non-binding principle, but then at the end of the day, this has to be a foundation for something that has to become binding. Okay. Now, this is my own personal view, and if you want, I can say this claim that it might not reflect the view of the organization, because of course I'm representing ITU, but here, I mean, I think it's an open forum and we need to also express views. Now, for example, from the ITU perspective, all the resolutions are voluntary, so member states can apply them or cannot apply them. But I think that in this specific context, maybe there is a need to go for an additional step and identify what could be the mechanism. From one side, to engage all the stakeholders, and also here, you know, the setup of the UN doesn't facilitate that, unfortunately. Now, I don't know how many of you know that ITU is one of the few, if not the only organization that actually have the private sector as institutional membership, you know. So we are quite kind of familiar with what means involving, let's say, private sector or other institutions that are not specifically member states. But I mean, in the UN discussion, you have member states discussing, you know, and we need to find a way to engage the other stakeholder into the discussion in order to have their views reflected, you see. And there are so many initiatives doing that, but at the end of the day, all these initiatives need to converge in something that it can be under the auspices of the UN, under the auspices of a member state or of an alliance, but something has to be aggregated, because otherwise, and this coming back to connecting the dots of the IGF, otherwise, instead of trying to aggregate the discussion, we will carry on connecting dots, and the dots will be initiated that every year will come out, and then instead of having 100, maybe next year we will have 200 or 300 or 400, and then we will carry on discussing without coming into a conclusion. I think this is a little bit my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to try to pick up on some of the questions on norms, and perhaps also some of the reflections from earlier panelists. I think it's worth us recognizing, which perhaps we haven't done yet through this panel, when we're talking about cooperation, that there is an enormous amount of cooperation that is ongoing currently in this space. It isn't about, we're not starting from a zero position here. We are all of us cooperating through our networks, through our multilateral, through our multi-stakeholder engagements, whether that's through the UN, through the GGE process, and other discussions in First Committee, whether that's through work in regional organizations in the OSCE and ASEAN, all around the world, and also through our capacity building initiatives, including through the Global Forum of Cyber Expertise that was launched at the Hague meeting of the London process. So there's an enormous amount of cooperation, facilitated not least by the ITU, in this space. And I would include our work on norms within that. So if I look at an international stability framework that the UK and many others promote, that is based as a foundation, the existence and application of current international law, norms that sit above that, which are different from law. They're not another way of writing law. Norms are a way of describing what responsible state behavior looks like, both in terms of what positive acts of cooperation responsible state behavior looks like, but also in terms of constraint. And beneath that, confidence building measures. So we look at the work that's happening in OSCE, in ASEAN, all around the world, in building confidence measures that support those norms, that support the application of international law, support transparency, and capacity building, and the recognition increasingly that capacity building supports a state's ability to participate in that international framework, to demonstrate its adherence to norms, to understand within its own national systems how international law applies and what processes and judicial requirements that it will need in its own circumstances to protect itself. And so I would like to sort of put norms in that context, norms that have been, I would stress again, recognised along with the application of international law by the UN General Assembly, and within a wider framework, which isn't just about saying everything has to be a step towards law or a step towards a treaty. There are a huge range of different layers of cooperative behaviours, activities that will collectively contribute to our international peace and security in cyberspace.
Thank you. Thank you. That's quite comprehensive. Anita, please go ahead.
Thank you. I think within the discussion on norms, it has to be accepted that given that the internet is a global public good and it's also governed at national levels, we need frameworks both at the global and national level, and norms building has to happen at both levels. Now, oftentimes when we think about cyber sustainability or cybersecurity, which is a part of cyber sustainability, we tend to think that these are technical norms that are easy to pin down in 10 steps. But actually, there are 3 components to this. One is at the layer of the network and software. The second is at the layer of data. And the third is at the layer of information. And when we speak about each of these, the security of the network, the security of data, and the security of information, you actually need different treatments, different protocols, different kinds of action plans, etc. So we can't be talking about fake news in the same breadth as we will probably talk about data security. You know, the two are different things, and you will probably need media governance frameworks to address the former, which is about news and information, whereas you will probably need a data-related framework to deal with insecurity or security of data. And here I think the considerations for developing countries come from the complexity that we have had with, let's say, the lack of infrastructure development. So one of the things is, it's not just about cyber weaponization and big things, you know, fear of cyber crime, war, etc., but the here and now and everyday things. For instance, you know, the individual consent frameworks, you know, in access, do they work for developing countries? You know, if someone says, write off your privacy through individual consent frameworks, you know, in the larger, you know, architectures of data, how important is the idea of group privacy? You know, these are very, very important questions when we talk about data. Similarly, any framework on data security should be able to think about data ownership. So that data ownership and data privacy are two sides of the coin when you think about cyber sustainability. So I think that we should actually not be mixing up things when we talk about developing norms, and we should address data, information, and network and software at 3 distinct layers, each of which requires separate treatment and protocols.
Thank you. Now, do we have any speakers from this side? Especially Kotiski. Would you like to respond to any of the... please, you want to respond? Yeah. Please go ahead. Okay.
Thank you. I just want to place some emphasis. When we talk of cooperation, we must really identify the kind of cooperation we need, especially taken from African perspective. We require a set of cooperation, especially in capacity building. Now, why is this necessary? It is necessary because if we leave Africa behind, it's still going to be affect the rest of the world. So we need to build a strong capacity in Africa to defend African network if we really are talking of global cybersecurity. Thank you.
Would like to join in with others, notably Sarah and Marina, in underscoring that when we talk about norms and rules in cyberspace, we already have in place a solid framework, the solid framework consisting of existing international law that governs cyberspace. And indeed, the issue is, and like others have said already, the issue is to translate it in the sense of, or to clarify how it applies. That's the only effort that we should engage in. That's the main effort we should engage in at this moment. And furthermore, to complement this set of existing norms that already govern the physical world, for the sake of enhancing stability in cyberspace, we have indeed in the framework of the UNGGE designed a set of additional voluntary non-binding norms that definitely help to enhance stability and responsible state behavior even more if we all apply them, which I would like to invite all states to do. And the UN General Assembly has embraced these norms and also invited the UN members to apply them. So indeed there is already, it's not, cyberspace is not a very calm and stable, it doesn't seem like a very calm and stable space at the moment, and indeed there are many threats, and threats are increasing, and that's of great concern, and we have to mitigate them, because otherwise people around the world will not be able to benefit and reap the fruits of an open, free and secure cyberspace. But it's not, what I want to underscore is that there is already a stable and solid framework of binding norms in place, and that's our existing international law. Thank you.
Now, please, if you have further questions, please can we leave it toward the last section. Now, moving to
paths facing us going ahead. So what is clear is that conflict will happen in the connected, internet-based ecosystem known as cyberspace. And the question is no longer if or when, but how almost the physical and or virtual consequences will be. This new reality challenges the old one-sided systems and communication systems and the compromising of data integrity. Though not a traditional arms control issue, we also remain very worried about the growing trend of weaponizing information. Though this is not a new trend in warfare, the ubiquity of connections makes such attempts scalable in ways we have not witnessed before and carries great risks. Data protection and digital safety measures was mentioned earlier, and I just want to stress the importance of these topics, and I know these will be addressed in other sessions. Although these issues do not constitute conflict in the traditional sense, the undermining of public trust in the integrity of democratic processes and herd state relations have their own destabilizing effects. Allow me to make a short leap to another technology that is important to see as related, and I'm pleased to see this reflected also in the program of the IGF this year, which is artificial intelligence-based technologies. This is not a discrete or fixed technology. As most of you know, it's a feature set that can be applied to any existing or new system or platform, including weapon systems. There are multiple emerging military applications of AI, from military planning and command and control to offensive cyber operations. Meanwhile, governance in cyberspace is stuck in what I would call a reactive band-aid mode. There is deep uncertainty about how the future of security in cyberspace may play out, not least because advances in these other technology fields like AI, but also quantum computing, threaten to undermine existing processes and as mentioned by Anita on my left, undermine trust and the social contract defining our communities physically and virtually. More than ever, and this is on the way forward, there needs to be agreement on what a responsible state or entity should and should not do in cyberspace. As stated by Ms. Kayuran, one important step is to raise awareness and universalize the implementation of the 11 norms she mentioned in her statement. Furthermore, leadership is critical. Leaders at all levels across all disciplines need to understand the shared business case for investing in and becoming cyber aware and build much needed cyber and digital literacy also across generations. The multi-stakeholder approach mentioned by Ms. Taylor on my left, some of the experts we consulted with from relevant industries said that there are actors in cybersphere who have resources to undertake offensive cyber operations so sophisticated that they cannot be defended by the technology alone. This raises very serious concerns from an arms controls perspective. Lastly, it's critical to look ahead and strengthen the practical impact of our collaborative efforts and invest in much needed norm entrepreneurship in the cyberspace domain. I'm thus glad to see that the next speaker on this list is Jan from Microsoft, who I'm sure will speak on this and on how to make these much-needed partnerships meaningful and protecting those that need it and when they need it the most, to paraphrase Ms. Betancourt. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anja. As you mentioned, and also Andre mentioned before, one of the latest development this year that has hit the headlines is the Microsoft proposal that the world needs a Geneva Convention. And we're very fortunate to have with us here today Jan Neutze. He's the Director of Cybersecurity in Microsoft Corporation. So, Mr. Neutze, I believe that this proposal, it actually contains several elements. It's not only one proposal of the Geneva Convention. Can you explain the elements contained in this proposal and why it is important?
Sure. Let me try to unpack that a little bit. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the organizers for including Microsoft on this panel. The IGF is an important opportunity to connect with people from governments, international organizations, NGOs, and the civil society more broadly on cybersecurity, which in recent years has become one of the important issues of our time. Cybersecurity is at the heart of everything we do at Microsoft. We spend over $1 billion a year on cybersecurity, and we have over 3,500 full-time professionals working on cybersecurity. But one thing is clear. In a world which is rapidly embracing digitization, people, regardless of their origin, will not use information and communication technologies which they do not trust. And societies will not be able to benefit from digital transformation unless the cyber ecosystem is both free and open, as well as stable and secure. And the challenge is that the stability of cyberspace really has been impacted by a number of developments. On the one hand, cyber criminals are becoming more professional and more aggressive in their tactics, exploiting unsuspecting users through social engineering, ransomware, and many other tactics. But as an ICT industry, and truly as societies as a whole, we're not just up against criminal groups operating online, we're also and increasingly concerned about another form of cyber attack. And to us it is clear that conflicts between nations are no longer confined to land, air, and sea. Indeed, a new cyber arms race is underway, with nations developing and unleashing a new generation of weapons aimed at governments and civilians alike, putting at risk the critical data and digitally powered infrastructure that we all depend on for our daily lives. And indeed, this year, 2017, truly marked another concerning inflection point in that regard, which saw attacks like WannaCry, which affected over 200,000 users in over 150 countries, and NotPetya, which initially targeted the systems of one particular country and then spread internationally, by some estimates causing over $1 billion in damages. 1 billion, one attack. And while we as technology companies, and we continue to stress this, while we as technology companies have the first responsibility to help address these issues, it would be a mistake to think that the private sector by itself can prevent or stop the risk of cyber attacks any more than it can prevent other types of military attacks. Nation-state investments in cyber weapons have advanced beyond the point where that is possible. That's one reason why the WannaCry attack also underscores the need for international norms and agreements to protect civilians from nation-state attacks. And when we called for a digital Geneva Convention earlier this year, we in fact did so by proposing 3 interrelated elements. 1, we called on governments to adopt legally binding commitments focused on reducing and ideally eliminating nation-state cyber attacks on civilian infrastructure below the threshold of armed conflict. And I'd like to add 2 important points on this. First of all, there are clearly important building blocks upon which such norms and agreements can and should build. For one thing, there's the important body of existing international law, which we think does and should apply to cyberspace. And as has been said by many speakers on this panel, more work needs to be done to identify how it applies to cyberspace. But then in addition to that, we think more work also needs to be done to identify what gaps might exist and how that gaps can be addressed. And that, we think, merits a lot of focus on this notion of peacetime norms. Now, creating such a new agreement could take many different forms and requires more than a single step. It also will not happen overnight, which is why we collectively must start to build a broader consensus on these issues today. Second, we've called on industry to do more and to work collectively to ensure the stability of cyberspace, and that includes commitments such as industry having to be 100% focused on defense, not enabling offense. It means we should issue patches and help our customers secure in an equitable manner and not pick sides in such conflicts. And then third, we believe more needs to be done to hold those actors accountable that violate internationally established norms. And one way to do that is to further refine and better connect those stakeholders, in particular in the private sector, but also importantly in academia, who can produce technical data that can serve to identify norms violators. The future of cybersecurity will require many steps by many people, but at Microsoft, we are keen to do our part. And while we don't believe we have all the answers, certainly we don't, we very much look forward to future collaboration with many of you in this room. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. We will come back to you with some more clarifications in this proposal, interesting proposal by Microsoft. Now we want to go back to Marina, the chair of the Global Commission on Stability of Cyberspace, to ask her what can and should be done international to promote an open, secure, resilient, stable, and accessible cyberspace and the use of ICTs after the 2016 and 2017, the latest, GGE could not agree in a consensus report.
Thank you, Juan. And answering this question, I will wear my other hat as advisor to the Estonian government on cybersecurity. And to start with, I would like to congratulate the organizers of the discussion on cybersecurity at IGF. I strongly believe in a multi-stakeholder approach, cooperation between governments, industry, private sector, academia, technical community, and civil society. Why? Cybersecurity is part of national and international security. So far, states have been the only ones dealing with security, or the main ones dealing with security. Cybersecurity is different. And states can't be successful in contributing to cybersecurity without cooperation. With industry, private sector, because industry and private sector owns critical infra. They are the ones who are providing online services. Academia helps us to answer the question how international law applies to cyber. Technical community, they have been in cyber since the beginning of the cyber revolution, and they know things that governments don't. Civil society, free, open, accessible, reliable internet is not only about technical solutions, it's also about principles and values. Human rights online equal to human rights offline. I think that some governments need to be reminded of that from time to time. Yes, GGE failed to reach consensus report because out of 5 mandatory areas, we were not able to agree on one, on applicability of international law. And that is very regrettable. But that's not the end of the world. Having said that, we should not forget about the fields where we made progress, including capacity building. It's important to engage all states in discussion in one form or another. Yesterday, I listened to the opening panel and what ICANN President and CEO Göran Marby said. He said that the first wave of internet users came mainly from developed countries. They were better educated and spoke English. The next billions will most probably come from less developed countries, and most probably they will not speak English. And that is okay. It is our duty and it is our obligation to reach out to them and to talk to them in the language that they understand. The same can be said about cybersecurity. The countries that are vocal and are active today are the mainly IT-savvy countries, e-dependent countries. But there are about 100 countries that have not spoken yet, and we have to reach out to them. GG made progress on confidence-building measures, also explaining previously agreed norms. And I don't understand why we, the members of the GG, were ready to talk within the group and are not ready to talk more widely about our positions. I think it's our obligation to international community to say what was discussed within that group and to share the draft report, or at least some chapters of the draft report. And finally, to conclude, I'd like to make 5 points. Discussion has to be continued, even in the situation where states have taken time out to look at the present situation and think about future. Second, discussion has to be multi-stakeholder discussion. Third, today's session proved that we have to undertake efforts to introduce and universalize what has been agreed so far in the GGs, especially the norms of 2013, 2015, and applicability of international law. It's not an agreement of 20 or 25 states. It's global. It was approved by UN General Assembly. All UN member states have their ownership. And we have to start finally answering the question how international law applies to cyber. If we can't do it globally, let's start it with the group of those who want to make progress and who want to have not only never-ending discussions, but also answers. And finally, to my colleagues, I know that UN has its rules, GG has its rules, but let's break the secret and let's talk openly what we talked among ourselves in the framework of the GG. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. But as you know, maybe the late GGE did not issue a report, didn't have a consensus report, but the previous GGE had a report. We're very lucky also to have together today with us Miguel Gutierrez. He's the General Director of Security Office for Computer Networks of the Ministry of Communication of Cuba. He was a member of the GGE, and so we want to ask him, what obstacles do you appreciate for the adoption by the states of the recommendation of the final report of the GGE that concluded its work in 2015?
Buenas tardes a todos y quiero agradecer primero a los organizadores por darnos la oportunidad de intercambiar aquí. He estado escuchando atentamente las consideraciones del resto de los panelistas y parece muy interesante todo. Para responder esta pregunta, yo considero que es necesario abordar algunas cuestiones que son relevantes. En primer lugar, ciertamente, el grupo no pudo alcanzar, el grupo de expertos no pudo alcanzar consenso en la última edición que recientemente concluyó. Y esto hace que cobre vital importancia, pues, el reporte anterior, o sea, del grupo anterior, que es de 2015. En segundo lugar, las cuestiones que se analizaron en este grupo de expertos realmente resultaron controversiales, en tanto existieron puntos de vista que, lógicamente, fueron diferentes entre los 25 estados que estaban representados en dicho grupo. En tercer lugar, el grupo de expertos ciertamente constituye un espacio importante para analizar las cuestiones inherentes a la ciberseguridad en el marco de las Naciones Unidas, dado que permite intercambiar de manera relativamente equilibrada cuestiones que preocupan a la comunidad internacional. No obstante, no es posible que los estados que no han formado parte del grupo de expertos adopten o endosen todas y cada una de las recomendaciones que se realizan en este informe final, en tanto no tuvieron la oportunidad de participar y expresar sus criterios durante las sesiones de trabajo. En este sentido, existen elementos que son sumamente importantes en las discusiones respecto a la ciberseguridad, que deben ser sometidos al análisis entre todos y cada uno de los Estados miembros de la ONU, tales como la soberanía y la aplicabilidad del derecho internacional y la Carta de las Naciones Unidas en un espacio de características particulares como el que nos ocupa. Finalmente, resulta importante establecer, en mi opinión, un mecanismo en el que puedan participar todos los estados de forma abierta y cooperativa para analizar los temas de la ciberseguridad y, bueno, así lograr un espacio de consenso que sea verdaderamente inclusivo en correspondencia con el espíritu de las Naciones Unidas. Muchas gracias.
Well, thank you. Now, let's go to the People's Republic of China. Mr. Long Qiu. Now, he's the coordinator for Cyber Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Cybersecurity is a global challenge. It's a challenge to be dealt with through the cooperation. What kind of concept and approach that the international community should adopt when advancing international process of cybersecurity? That's number one. And number two, not really number two anyway, I think it's a continuation. Let me repeat that question. What kind of concept and approach that the international community should adopt when advancing international process of cybersecurity with a view to enhance cooperation and safeguard peace and development of the cyberspace? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The top of the main session is empowering global cooperation on cybersecurity for sustainable development and peace. And for a better understanding of the issue, in my view, we need to be very clear about two fundamental principles. Number one is the principle of peace. Is cyberspace a place of peace or a place for battlefield? The answer should be very simple and clear. Cyberspace should be a place of peace, stability, and prosperity. Without peace, we cannot have sustainable development and security in cyberspace. And peace is not only the end, but also the means. Some people may argue that cyber war is the reality, and we should accept that reality. But I think it is fair to ask such a question. Are we doing everything we can to prevent cyber war, to prevent cyber arms race, as suggested by Microsoft in Geneva Digital Convention, saying that industry should 100% focus on defense rather than offense? And number two, the principle of cooperation. In my view, in cyberspace, all countries are interconnected, and our interests are intertwined. We are in the same boat, having shared interest in keeping the cyberspace a peaceful, secure, cooperative, and orderly place. We belong to the community of shared future. Therefore, cooperation, coordination is the only way to address the threats and the challenges pertaining to peace and stability in cyberspace. The new frontier calls for new thinking and a new concept. We need to build a new type of international relations in cyberspace. Cold War mentality, zero-sum thinking, or the doctrine of like coercion or deterrence. Do not bring peace and stability in cyberspace. And lastly, on governance, there have been plenty of discussions on cyberspace governance during this session. I think it is time to take real actions for rule-based governance and structured governance, as rightly put it by Undersecretary General Liu Zhenmin at yesterday's high-level segment of the session. Concerning rules, the UNGG has done quite a lot in developing norms and rules, and the UN should continue to play a leading role. Although this year's UNGG was concluded without any consensus report, it cannot be used as an excuse to deviate from multilateralism. Instead, it rather highlights the urgency for the UN to start a new round of process. And in the long run, we should establish an open and inconclusive process within the UN and advocate broader participation in developing rules for cyberspace. As stated by Chinese President Xi Jinping recently at the 19th National Congress of the Communist Party of China, China aims to foster a new type of international relations and build a community with a shared future for mankind. And I think it is also applies in cyberspace. And China is ready to work with all parties to build a multilateral, democratic, and transparent global cyber order and foster a peaceful, secure, open, and cooperative cyberspace. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Now, let me call on the head international cyber policy, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Carmen Gonsley from Netherlands. How can we ensure that the rules of law governs cyberspace? How can we ensure that the rule of law governs cyberspace? Yep, thank you.
400 years ago, Hugo Grotius could not have foreseen that one day the principles that he laid the foundation for, the principles for international law, would govern not only the physical world, but also the seas, the space, and now in this 21st century, cyberspace. But this is indeed the case. The whole body of international law that has been built since, also notably since the end of the Second World War, in the framework of the United Nations, embodied in the UN Charter, forms the basis for our collective behavior in cyberspace. A lot has been said about the threats and the build-up of capabilities in cyberspace that might threaten or the stability and peace. What I would like to stress is that the acknowledgement of the application of existing international law to cyberspace does not lead to the militarization of cyberspace. To the contrary, rules provide clarity and stability, and above all, they provide for a predictability. Without the application of international law, cyberspace threatens to become risks to become the digital Wild West. The good news is thus that we have not to develop anything new. The rules are already in place. We believe, as do many other countries that have spoken out today, that the existing body of international law, which has long underpinned relations between states, applies in cyberspace. And of course, the key question is, how does this law apply to this new dimension? And we welcome very much that the discussion about this key question is gathering pace. Various processes have already been launched over the past years to undertake this endeavor. The United Nations group of governmental experts made important contributions in their 2013 and 2015 reports. And these reports, and most notably the 2015 report, were endorsed by the UN General Assembly and thus contain an invitation to all states around the world to implement these important recommendations. Apart from the valuable work of the UN group of governmental experts, a group that indeed unfortunately could not reach consensus last year, but hopefully in the future renewed discussions in the UN will take up the work again. Apart from these UN efforts, there are other valuable efforts in place that take this challenge of clarifying how international law applies in cyberspace head-on, like the Tallinn Manual 2.0 in the framework of the The Hague process. These processes provide guidance based on the valuable insight of countless accomplished academics in this area. And in a discussion with member states of the UN and other bodies, will lead to clarification and exchange of expertise. Because indeed, exchange of expertise is also of paramount importance. What I would like to underscore is that not only principles like sovereignty and non-intervention, but also principles like due diligence and state responsibility apply in cyberspace. And most notably also international humanitarian law. Let's please not forget that we have all these important bodies of law in place. International law also governs the space below the threshold of armed attack. The law of state's responsibility is very much applicable there. And that will help us to enhance stability and avoid escalation. So to conclude, we must continue our endeavors to clarify how international law applies, and on the same time, parallel to that, work on these very important additional voluntary norms of responsible state behavior that will enhance peace even more. And also in that respect, I think I would like to commend the work of the previous GGEs, but also like to underscore the importance of input in this discussion by other forums around the world, also forums of multi-stakeholder character, like the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. To continue in this line of how to address the challenges and how to move forward, we want to ask again Ambassador Kruski of how could we make international cyberspace more secure and stable, bearing in mind that the global business is now thinking about rules of the game in the ICT sphere.
Благодарю, уважаемые коллеги. То, что бизнес стал проявлять интерес к вопросам кибербезопасности и выдвигать идеи для решения этой проблемы, на мой взгляд, это очень позитивное явление и может быть объяснено двумя основными факторами. Первый – это совершенно очевидный. Это чудовищная уязвимость самого бизнеса, даже самого большого и глобального, от кибератак. Второй, о нем частично уже говорили вчера на форуме и сегодня, заключается в том, что вся мировая цивилизация, все мировое развитие, новая научно-технологическая революция не могут развиваться без решения всего лишь одного политического вопроса – как обеспечить кибербезопасность. Посудите сами, как могут выстраиваться облачные технологии, робототехника, искусственный интеллект, беспилотный транспорт, безналичные финансы, кибермедицина, интернет вещей и многое-многое другое, что определяет прогресс человечества, если все это является заложником деятельности хакеров, киберпреступности, кибертерроризма и в самом худшем варианте кибервойны. Идея подключения к переговорам по обеспечению информационной безопасности всех заинтересованных сторон, включая гражданское общество и бизнес, естественно, при решающей роли государств не нова. Впервые, насколько я это видел, она была высказана французским президентом применительно к последнему саммиту «восьмерки» в Давиле и отражена в итоговом документе этого форума и получила свое название как многостейкхолдеровая модель. Россия, естественно, поддерживает эти разносторонние усилия и считает, что все соответствующие инициативные предложения, наработки, в том числе и в рамках этого форума, могли бы быть конструктивно рассмотрены в рамках возобновленной группы правительственных экспертов ООН, надеюсь, созыв которой будет решен в следующем году, и в контексте выработки универсальных правил ответственного поведения государств в киберпространстве. Спасибо.
Thank you. Now we're coming back to you, Gutierrez. In your opinion, what would be the most relevant element to solve in order to reach a common understanding regarding the security of the cyberspace?
Sí, bueno, yo me voy a referir a 5 elementos que yo considero que son medulares para alcanzar este entendimiento común que tanto hace falta en el tema ciberseguridad. Primero, se debe analizar el marco legal regulatorio existente de manera profunda y desde el compromiso con la comunidad internacional para determinar la necesidad de nuevas normas e instrumentos legales jurídicamente vinculantes que complementen el derecho internacional respecto a su aplicabilidad en el ciberespacio. En segundo lugar, se debe definir claramente que no es posible solucionar los conflictos en el ciberespacio por otra vía que no sea la de la cooperación entre los Estados. En tercer lugar, abordar el ciberespacio como un ámbito edificador que contribuya al desarrollo pacífico de los países y no como un espacio en el que se legitime la guerra y, por consiguiente, la aplicación de contramedidas y la reinterpretación del derecho internacional y la Carta de la ONU como justificación ante actos nocivos perpetrados a través de las tecnologías de la información y la comunicación. En cuarto lugar, definir las cuestiones relativas a la atribución ante la ocurrencia de ataques cibernéticos para evitar enjuiciar a los estados de manera deliberada y la consiguiente escalada de los conflictos en el ciberespacio. Finalmente, se debe definir, en mi opinión, una terminología común que facilite la comprensión de las cuestiones relativas a la ciberseguridad en el plano multilateral global. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Miguel, and thank you for bringing into the table here the problem of attribution. As you know, here we're talking about the rule of law, about perpetrators of some misdeeds, but for that we need smoking gun, and in cyberspace it's difficult to have the smoking gun, so this is the problem of attribution that's been in the table for long. One of the components of the Microsoft proposal is the creation of an international cyber attack attribution organization. And we want to ask the representative of Microsoft if he can give us some details of how this organization will be and function, and how we, the international community, could help implement such organization.
Thank you, and I'll try to be a bit briefer in my response this time around. I think you've identified an important element, and that is the role that attribution actually plays in both helping to advance stability in cyberspace, but also helping to, let's say, reduce the level of, to some degree, reduce the level of noise in the system by making it harder for those that are willing to commit these attacks to remain unidentified. And so what we have seen, and this is based on vast amounts of cyber threat intelligence that we have at Microsoft, that many other companies have, is that there has been a steady rise in sophisticated threat actors willing to use cyber offensive means. And I can tell you our cyber threat intelligence team has, as I mentioned, seen a clear increase in the groups that are in fact perpetrating these attacks. What we haven't seen is a degree of collaboration or coordination, both between private sector companies, but maybe also between private sector companies, the broader technical community, academia, civil society to some degree, to help bring together in a more meaningful way that technical data to maybe help develop a more common methodology and then coordinate in a more systemic and advanced manner the analysis on the basis of that technical data that does currently exist today. And so what we have proposed, and again, this is certainly something that has evolved over time, is to start thinking about some mechanism, some international group. It could very well be an international NGO, frankly, not led by governments, but potentially led by non-governmental actors, such as the private sector and academia, that could pull together from different sources this technical data and make a statement about the origin of such attacks at a sufficient degree of or sufficient level of confidence. And we think having such a third party organization, potentially an international NGO, that is able to advance these elements would actually be a significant and a meaningful contribution, as I said, in terms of raising the stakes for those who are willing to go and violate potentially norms that they might have agreed to before. Again, this is a lot of work in progress. I think there's a lot of we think there's a lot of room for this to grow organically over time. But we are seeing interest among other companies and certainly among other actors in civil society that want to contribute to potentially building such a process. And so this is why we put this idea on the table, and we certainly welcome feedback and other ideas.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. Now, one of the biggest challenges within the multi-stakeholders group, we have different perceptions and views on the definition of cybersecurity. Now, what type of method exists that can allow us all to work together and actually govern even through responsibility, even though responsibility is so distinct? So what kind of method do exist from the contents of the Best Practices Forum on Cybersecurity? Thank you.
Thank you.
Please.
So in the Best Practices Forum on Cybersecurity, there was widespread agreement that multi-stakeholder cooperation is a necessity because cybersecurity is a shared responsibility, and the security of one individual or participant in the internet will be affected by events that actually happen to another individual. There was, however, also agreement that it's actually difficult. And one of the reasons is that while there are many definitions of cybersecurity, there is actually no universally accepted one. And these differences are less rooted in language, which would probably be easier to solve, than they are in the priorities that a state has in engaging. Some see cybersecurity as a method of protecting and developing the economic potential of a nation, while others focus on human security, and yet a third group sees it as a national security priority. Rather than throwing our hands up in the air and shying away from this complexity, we can also see an opportunity to engage on these topics of difference, and through our varied areas of expertise and our vantage points, make meaningful progress. But there are a few prerequisites. Wearing my other hat as a director of the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams, I'd like to share two that have helped us as incident responders find agreement rapidly during a major security incident. First of all, we all have to show up to the table. Today, not all stakeholder groups join in on discussions that can actually move some of these complex topics forwards. When everyone shares their views, even when at the starting point there's little agreement, there is actually an opportunity to start from even that basic level of agreement that may exist and may be difficult to discern. During an incident, we don't always have the choice to show up or not. We simply have to do it. But when we prepare for one, we do have that choice, and it's important that we make the right decision there. Second, it requires a change in mindset. Instead of thinking, how can I fix this problem, we need to acknowledge that none of us can provide security ourselves. We need to take a step back and consider how others see the problem and how they are impacted, and find those smallest points of agreement where we can get started. In the BPF, we talked about a number of ways to make practical progress forward. And we feel that as a community, we need to build a culture of cybersecurity and identify a core set of shared values. And that is something that can only go hand in hand with ensuring widespread participation of all stakeholder communities. This culture then needs to be developed through tools, and many of the speakers today raised the value of norms. Norms are a strong way of expressing what is responsible behavior in cyberspace. They help reduce uncertainty, they increase levels of effectiveness. But it's important that spaces exist for civil society and the technical community to help contribute to those norms. The tool that a norm is also needs to be replicated within stakeholder groups or within narrower frameworks than just a state or interstate behavior. An interesting idea that was raised involved the development of duties of care, which describe the responsibilities of individual stakeholders in cyberspace, tying those clearly to local legislation, policy, and best practices. Both of those are really interesting ideas that can help us move forward. The BPF identified no less than 18 high-level areas that would benefit from wider multi-stakeholder cooperation. While as a forum, we're limited in our ability to tackle all of them, it's our hope that the outcome document that we'll publish after the IGF will inspire work that can be continued both within and outside of this forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And as Anja said, the bad things are already happening in cyberspace. So I want to come back to Daniel Staufhausser to ask, are there other aspects of the international cybersecurity that the civil society can help mitigate and also to take forward?
I'm not sure about mitigate, but I think there is ample room for supporting processes that are out there. And let me just mention a few. Probably we haven't mentioned also, besides complementary to the norms, the confidence building measures, which have been part of GG as well, and of course have been successfully developed at the OECE and at the ARF and otherwise. So we see scope for civil society to follow this discussion, follow implementation, not monitoring, but contribute to that complementary processes. I just wanted to say also that I'm very pleased to hear, of course, that the CERT work of CERTs is mentioned here, and in our capacity building projects workshop, we have both the policy diplomats and CERT together in the same room so that they understand each other. Of course, we would welcome and we would take up on Marina's offer to see these principle or the tech or the content of where you seem to have had already a high level of agreement. I think that is also not only interesting. So we have to see how we could get a hand on that. Maybe you just leave it somewhere and then before the cleaners come and so forth. I don't know, we can see. But that is, I think, would be very helpful for everybody. So another further roles that we have still 1 minute. Yeah, is of course that, and you know, it was mentioned by I think Anita. I mean, it's to work also with consumers, users. I think there, you know, on the hygiene side of being a participant in the global cyberspace, I think there civil society can do a lot working with users, population at large, and so forth. I think we can, you know, continue the dialogue and with companies. I mean, Microsoft takes the lead, but there are many other companies we could maybe encourage to join in the thinking of what are the concerns of the private sector, what norms they would like to see. I think also something we have started now is to bring the discussion to the parliamentary groups, to parliaments, because at the end of the day, the parliaments will have to approve cybersecurity strategies and legislation, but we see that there is a big gap, or that they have not been concerned yet, or many. So I think we're working with IPU to reach out those parliaments. I think one could do more of public consultations. The EU does that, but could be done otherwise. I think Ambassador Kruzkrieg mentioned these, emerging issues of artificial intelligence, lethal autonomous weapons, the connection with cybersecurity and so forth, ethics and technology. All these things are sort of coming of frontier issues, but some say it's a front door issue already. So civil society and academia especially can help think and make the connection. Finally, for instance, the new issue or ongoing issue on preventing use of ICTs for terrorist purposes, which is a great concern to the Security Council, as we all know. There, a civil society organization was invited, ICT for Peace, but to start a dialogue with the private sector. So these are some of the functions that we could see coming up in the next 2-3 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And I want to go now to something that we have not talked here. One thing that we agreed is that cybersecurity and to have a safe internet, it's a responsibility for all consumers, users, policymakers, companies. So everybody has to be involved in this endeavor to try to make cybersecurity safe. So that is, somebody say that there's some agreement that a global culture of cybersecurity is needed. But that has to be taught to the persons and especially to the young. And we're very happy to have here a professor of a university, Mr. Ambasso. So we want to ask him, what is the role of education providers to help to create this global culture of cybersecurity?
Thank you once more. From the narrative so far, we can all agree that cybersecurity requires aggressive education at all levels that can match the pace of threat landscape. This underscores that providing the right kind of education to all tiers of stakeholders is vital. It must be deliberate and prioritized. It means that every connected entity requires some form of training and awareness, starting from basic cybersecurity hygiene to more advanced cybersecurity. Therefore, developing cybersecurity is vital in the fight against cyberspace insecurity and stability, of which the education providers have a vital role to play. I have emphasized on providing the right kind of education. What does that mean? It means that all the stakeholders do not have the same responsibility in the cyberspace, and therefore the kind of challenges they face are quite different. So providing the right and proportionate kind of education is a critical defense strategy that must be adopted. For instance, an internet user simply requires basic cybersecurity awareness and education, but internet provider requires a different set of awareness and education. Software developers requires different set of education, especially to be able to develop software that is secure and stable. Human resources manager requires a different set of cybersecurity awareness and education to be able to recruit appropriate personnel. The supply chain also requires a different set of cybersecurity awareness and education to be able to buy equipment that is actually secure and stable. However, some stakeholders in the cyberspace require some sound foundational courses like mathematics and science, and not all requires that. What is the implication? The implication is that all that needs all form of education, it requires that we need a rethink in our national curriculum to include cybersecurity education at all tiers of learning. And this is very, very vital, especially in Africa. We need to inculcate cybersecurity culture from all tiers of education. And the global community must be able to encourage this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mbana. So now I'm coming back to you, Valeria Bentecourt, from civil society. What are the challenges and barriers that you see to human rights based, what are the challenges and barriers that you see to human rights based approach? Let me repeat again. Yeah, I think there's an issue here. What challenges or barriers do you see to human rights based approach to cybersecurity policy?
Thank you for the question. I think the human element and human rights have not been yet accounted for enough. And putting people and their rights in the centers of cybersecurity-related policies requires reinforcing the multi-stakeholder collaboration and cooperation, but also breaking down silo boundaries. So adopting and applying recommendations that have emerged from multi-stakeholder and expert efforts and processes such as the Freedom Online Coalition, the Net Mundial, the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace, among others, could be a good step to translate the human rights approach to cybersecurity into action. Obviously, ground rules for cybersecurity underpin on human rights are needed, but the process to agree on them is equally important. The way in which policy decision-making happens has to significantly change. Another challenge we see ahead is around transparency and accountability, not only in relation to the purposes, the scope, and the implementation of cybersecurity strategies, but also in relation to cyber defense and cyber offense capacity of states. If governments are adopting approaches that instead of creating conditions for strengthening the security of users, create greater insecurity justified by the so-called national security, then they must be subject to greater accountability and transparency. In particular, there is the need to hold governments accountable for investing in technology that restricts and violates rights of users, that contradicts existing international human rights law, and that does not contribute to stability, peace, and development. Thank you.
Thank you, Valeria. We have some minutes left, so we want to open the floor for questions from the audience. Do we have some from the remote? Not now. So are there some questions for the speakers from the audience? Yes, please.
Thank you for the excellent discussion. Vladimir Radunovic, Diplo Foundation. The question is a little bit back on the norms and the whole dialogue. I definitely can praise the whole work of the UNGG, OSCE, the regional fora, Global Commission, everything that's happening. The question is, let's imagine that at some point in future we are going to have the norms and even the treaty, if we wish. But how can we make sure that this is actually enforceable? Now, in the session today, we heard already that even the existing international humanitarian law gets broken every day. We are witnessing greater cyber armament. We mentioned that this morning. The Diplo did a mapping of about 20 countries that confirm themselves that they have offensive cyber capabilities, another 9 or 10 at least, with great indications. Probably there are many more. Attribution is a big problem that we heard also and could be misleading. So what are the solutions? And concrete questions are, is it realistic to expect that countries that have already brought cyber armament are going to step back and the new countries are not going to invest in cyber armament? Is it realistic to expect? Can we work on cyber disarmament? Second, even if we have a technical attribution which is quite reliable, there is a question of legal and political attribution. What happens with that? Can we make sure that a technical attribution will be enough? And thirdly, of course, the work on the CBMs, which is really important when it comes to avoiding misunderstanding and escalation. Thank you.
Very interesting question, but early on, there were some questions made in the previous section, but I think it applies more here. It wasn't answered. So can you say it again, please, very quickly?
Thank you, Juan. My name is Walter Natris. I have my own consultancy. The question was on process. What actually was discussed by the multi-stakeholders, so from government, from industry, from civil society and academia, where they were all in the room, they said the following. We need to focus on the most urgent topics, and we need a process to make that actually happen. And then let me give one example, if I'm allowed to. We're talking about cyber warfare, cyber insecurity, etc., about states having to solve things. What makes us most insecure is devices that come on the market inherently insecure. And if we can, for example, take one pilot next year, which is going to say, in 2 years from now, there's no device coming on the market that has no unique password. That is something which has a horizon, it has a focus, it involves all stakeholders, and everybody, wherever they live in the world, will profit from the outcome. So in other words, if the IGF is able to sustain such a process, then the content will follow that will be worthwhile participating in. So how would you look at a process like that and as a tryout for the IGF to do something different that it never done before? So thank you.
Thank you, Wout. There's another question over here.
I will speak in English because I think that
Identify yourself for the record.
I'm sorry, I'm the expert dealing with disarmament, ITU, science and technology, refugees affairs. I also cover Committee of Red Cross. So I'm speaking in English because maybe this will help to interact with the different colleagues. We know each other. Well, Christian, that is seated in the middle of the room, and the different GGE experts and different colleagues from IGF. I just want to make a comment regarding to make an interactive dialogue with the colleague from Diplo Foundation that is well known in Switzerland because of the great job in training and capacity of different diplomats in Geneva and focus on internet governance. Well, everybody knows Jovan and his recent publication of the 7th edition of his book. Just want to respond. Can we work in disarmament in this field? Yes. And we listen Anne Kaspersen, our very new director of UNODA here in Geneva, and with a great presentation. We can work in disarmament? Yes. Can we find a mechanism, because the Diplo Foundation experts said that it is difficult to guarantee how to apply a future treaty or future convention, but we listened to Microsoft representative talking on a possible creation of an international group that from the technical point of view could identify the attribution. But of course, I agree with Diplo Foundation that despite there is an international group or institutional mechanism to deal with the attribution, in any case, United Nations, that is a universal membership of member states, will need to have a connection with this new mechanism that will be dealing with the attribution, because, for example, Security Council, when there is a violation of the UN Charter, where there is a threat to international security, we need to have proof. We need to have proof that there is a violation of the UN Charter, then to proceed with the application of the Article 7 measures. So I think that we can work in disarmament despite there are 20 countries working in cyber operations. We can work in disarmament. We can work in voluntary measures. We can work with CBMs. We can establish an institutional mechanism as is being proposed by Microsoft. But we also need states. We also need state governments receiving that technical information of a violation of certain norms, certain standards for international community to take a decision. I mean, it's like going to the criminal court, to the International Criminal Court. We need to have the proof to take a decision. So I think it's more or less this discussion is very, very good because we have all the multi-stakeholder approach. We have the enterprises, we have the industry, we have the civil society, we have Academia, we have the experts, but at the same time, we need to engage with the states for them to take care about any situation that provoke an unstable space. So we need to have certain norms, voluntary, maybe they could become legally binding, but in the middle, we need to have an institutional mechanism that will help states to get that technical information on who is violating or who is creating damage to our infrastructure. Sorry to speak too much, but it's very interesting comments from Diplo Foundation, from Microsoft, from UNODA, from the civil society, from the industries. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a very pertinent reflection of how to link Microsoft proposal with the general United Nations environment. I think we have 2 questions from remote audience, so he will read it aloud so we can respond. The speakers can respond.
So we have 2 questions from Abdel Jalil Bahar Bong from IGF Chad. He's wondering what is the role that young people can play to contribute to have a safe internet governance ecosystem, and what are some of the strategies to help protect the internet users to navigate safely without worries about cyber attacks, and also how to protect young people and children online.
Thank you. And we're going to take the last question because, well, it's been piling up and we have limited time left. Please.
Thank you. My name is Abdul Hakim Ajijola. I'm from the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace. This question is open to everybody, but I think particularly Ma'am Betancourt, you may be able to address it. How do we best include the unrepresented in these conversations, especially future generations? And you know, we're talking about those even unborn, but we basically have to make these things future-proofed. And then B, the unconnected. And as you know, we're talking about 2 to 3 billion human beings. Many of them, I believe, happen to be women. Thank you.
Well, this should be the last. Go on.
Thank you very much. My name is Mary Uduma, and I'm from Nigeria. My question is one, is there a stakeholder that is missing in this conversation? And is there a stakeholder that holds the us to peace when we talk of cybersecurity for development and peace? 2, I've heard about norms, rules being talked about since we started this program, since yesterday, from the high level up to now, the Global Commission, every other person talking about norms. How will it be enforced? Who will be responsible? How do we hold people accountable? And even if you say voluntary or binding, how can it be enforced so that we would achieve the what we are looking at in having peace in the cyberspace? Thank you.
Thank you. So now we begin speakers to react to all these questions. The first one that raised the hand was Sarah. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. That was a huge, fantastically diverse range of questions. I'll try to pick off a few, but I probably will fail to do all of them. So the first question that I wanted to respond to came from the other side of the floor and wanted to know, first of all, the likelihood of states to step back from developing cyber arms, I think. I think that it's going to be a challenge, but I think that as in the conventional space, in the kinetic space, we do expect, look for, and indeed do see states de-arming themselves in certain categories. And I wouldn't say necessarily that it's impossible that that couldn't happen also in cyberspace. These discussions will be important. We already look at how certain certain conventions on arms control, certain conventions on export, such as the Wassenaar Agreement, should apply to cyber tools. And I think that we absolutely need to have a discussion about the destructive nature of cyber tools and where it's appropriate for states to talk about disarming. The first step to that, of course, is transparency on arming. And so I would say, and I call upon all states to do as the UK has done, to talk about its cyber capabilities, to be transparent about where it is developing cyber capabilities, to talk about the rules, decision-making processes, political, judicial, parliamentary authorities that govern the use of those capabilities, so that we can increase transparency and confidence and allow us to move forward into an honest discussion about the likelihood of disarmament. The second question, I think, very rightly pointed out that attribution is not only technical, it's also legal and political. Today is a very interesting day, for example, because the UK and the US have today attributed Lazarus Group, the North Korean actors, for the WannaCry ransomware cyber attack. Let me be very clear, that attribution on the UK's part is technical, it's legal, and it's political. All of those decision-making processes were gone through in our system to ensure that we have technical confidence in the attribution that we have made, and our National Cybersecurity Centre has assured that. We have legal confidence in that attribution, and indeed that will allow us to pursue law enforcement activity against that group that we consider to be responsible. And we have a political decision that we will be really clear that it was North Korean actors, Lazarus Group, who were responsible, and we understand the political consequences of that decision, and we understand the geopolitical environment that that attribution sits in. So to say that it is not possible, that it's too difficult to do attribution, is disingenuous. It is hard, but it is possible, and we should be doing it and using it to call out irresponsible state behavior when we see it. And the final part of that question, I think, related to confidence-building measures and how do we support confidence-building measures. So I think one of the things that we should be doing, and in fact are doing in our regional groupings, is look at how we can use confidence-building measures to support transparency, to support cooperation. So on transparency, talking about our capabilities is a confidence-building measure. This discussion here today between states, between industry, between civil society is a confidence-building measure. We are opening ourselves up to challenge. We're talking about these issues. And there is much more that we can do within our state groupings and with other actors. So I look at the efforts within the OSCE to establish a group of points of contact which allow us, when an incident emerges, to know who to call, both on an operational level but also on a political level, because these attacks are sometimes political that we all suffer, and the response that we want to calibrate is a political decision. And I see quite a lot of hope around these confidence-building measures and how we can use them to build a more constructive environment which will allow us, when we return to international multilateral conversations, as I'm sure that we will do after the last GGE, to have a more conducive environment to a positive conversation, because we've used confidence-building measures within regional groups bilaterally in order to support a greater understanding of how we work together. And I just wanted to pick up on the question of the importance of tackling insecure devices. In the United Kingdom, we are working with industry, we're working with other governments to look at what a code of practice could look like for security by design, to ensure that we are developing with industry a set of standards that will help ensure that devices are rolling out in the future don't suffer the security problems that the devices are in the past, and we are not struggling, as we are doing now, to reverse engineer security into the internet. So I think that is a really important conversation for this group, for a multi-stakeholder group, because those codes of practice must be pulled together through industry, with governments, with the advice of academia and civil society. I've got a lot more to say, but I better stop because Juan's looking at me.
Come back again. How long is the other speaker who raised his hand, please?
谢谢Juan。刚才有位先生提到了这个网络军控、网络裁军的问题，提到了很多具体问题，包括 attribution， 包括如何去 enforce 这些国际上这些规定但我觉得提出这些问题都很重要恰恰是我们国际社会应该认真考虑和讨论的问题。当然这些问题也比较复杂我们目前呢可能还没有一个特别这个直接的简单的答案但是我相信如果国际社会我们秉持共同的目标那就是维护网络空间的和平合作开放我想我们国际社会总是能找到办法的这个办法可能是一些 norms 或者 rules 可能是一些 political declarations 可能是一些 legally binding treaties 当然我们觉得这个可能性都是存在的但关键是我们要形成一个国际共识就是面对这些网络军备竞赛网络战网络武器化等等这些问题产生的后果这个我们国际社会应该做什么我们需要进行认真的严肃的讨论谢谢
Too long. Now we have 5 speakers that want to speak, but we only have 10 minutes left. So we're going to have only 2 minutes per speakers. And please, time is the tyranny of time. We cannot beat that. So please, the next one, I think in the queue, I will leave you for later because, or you were before, or was Obiso? Then Obiso, please.
So I'm not going to comment on this because I think that Sarah and the colleagues from China articulated well. But I want to complement that. I will be really short because I think that in all this discussion there is always a missing part that sometimes we actually miss to understand, which is the different level of understanding and the different level of development that the country have, And sometimes we assume the country have the expertise and the capability and the knowledge to do attribution or to do all the operational stuff that is needed to actually get into a point. But, experience from ITU, which is a little bit more, comfortably talking about capacity building, because it's something that we actually need to do and it's part of our mandate, working with first. Sometimes we go in countries that don't even have an incident response capability in place. So how we can expect to have that kind of a country reacting and even endorsing or, understanding what a confidence building measure is if they don't have at all the understanding of the overall cybersecurity posture at the national level. So in all this discussion, I think it's always important to understand that, out of the 193 member states, 130 are considered developing countries, and a part of this, which is substantive, that don't have the ability to understand, but not because they don't understand, they don't have the intelligence to understand, simply they don't have the knowledge and they don't have the expertise. And this is something that us as international community we need to actually push for. And then we can instigate all the processes in helping the countries to endorse all the elements that we have been discussing, including even, let's say, kind of getting into the adopting confidence building measure or any measure, whether they are voluntary binding or whatever. I think that's an important element we always need to take into consideration.
Of course, it's important to always take into consideration the different level of development of the country. It's obvious that many people forget about that. So, Daniel, you're next. Please be brief because we want to give...
The lady about there is a community missing here. That's the peace community. And as ICT for Peace Foundation, I totally agree with you, and I mentioned in my introductory statement that we have to have a much broader involvement of NGO civil society who are in their daily business deal with peace in the ground. But having said that, and we do a lot of work how to enable peacekeeping, peace building, human rights protection, ICTs for peaceful purposes. But the discussion here, our experience was that it was for think tanks related to governments. Very few NGOs have engaged and wanted to be in dialogue or thinking about hard security questions. So this is just the way it is, and we have to open it. But it is also, these things are so complex sometimes that it take some time to acquire the capability with each cyber, peace-related NGOs to be part of a discussion. Sorry.
Let's finish with this. I know that there are two over there. Anja, you wanted to say something? No. So now we move to Anita. Please, headlines, because we don't have much time.
Absolutely. So this is a question about what does it have to do with people who are unconnected, and how do you interpret this? I think we should understand human security not as a negative right. I mean, to look at cybersecurity from a human security framework means it's a positive right, and therefore I think the headlines is that states have a responsibility to also provision public goods. India is a country with the largest, I think, increasing amount of cyber frauds online. And people who are yet to come online are oftentimes, losing money because their bank accounts are already digitized. So the government has come up with a unified payment interface, which I think is an important public good, so that you look at security from a positive rights framework. Second headline, if I don't have time, I will pass.
Very clear, very clear. Jameson, what is your headlines?
Yes, very quickly, that we need to increase the number of hubs available around the world. Right now, we have hubs around where those that are not connected, they gather together to listen to what is going on right now. And secondly, when it comes to how can youth be guided on the internet, we need to take note of security. On board, the latest antivirus application, onboard it on your system, and be sure that before you submit your payment information that the site is secured, and then also change your password regularly. So if you do those basic stuff, you could be, to an extent, be guided as you move around the internet.
Jameson, from this side, we have Carmen and Beso and Valeria. So we'll see it in that order.
Thank you, Juan. I would like to answer the question about that was posed, and it's very relevant. How do we enforce responsible behavior in cyberspace? And I would like to focus on the element of capacity building, because I think that collective efforts to invest in capacity building, not only in primary capacity building, that will help countries to ensure that they have the right organizational structures and capacity in place, cybersecurity strategies, for example, certs, that will, but only primary capacity building is very important. That's the foundation. But on top of that, we should invest collectively to build capacity in the legal sphere and also in the diplomatic sphere. And I think that will help gradually to increase the number of countries and actors that are able to engage in capacity building. And we do appreciate positively the contribution of industry also to that discussion. Ideas like the Attribution Council are interesting contributions to the interesting contributions to the discussion. That being said, of course, indeed, we have to underscore that. I want to underscore that attribution is not only a matter, indeed, of technical forensics. It is also a matter, and it has already been stated before, of a legal and political process. And when a country attributes, that's really a sovereign act. But that being said, capacity building will definitely enhance our collective capabilities to do so. And when we do that, we will have better opportunities to call out, to hold those who do not behave responsibly in cyberspace to account. We can do that by peer pressure, by increasing the number of countries that do want to adhere to rules, and make and bring to the surface those who don't. And that will hopefully help to increase stability and peace in cyberspace.
Thank you, Carmen. Professor Mambazo, we are running out of time, but please be brief.
Just quickly, what I want to emphasize is that there cannot be a global solution for everything. States must be made to understand they have responsibility as well as individuals, and the industry has a responsibility. And especially in Africa, localizing these responsibilities must take a national leadership. So my take is how the global community should be able to encourage, especially African countries, to have strong leadership in cybersecurity. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. I would like to respond to the question about inclusion of voices that are not yet represented. And I think it is important to realize that it applies not only to civil society voices, but also the voices of, it has been said, voices of stakeholders of developing countries as a whole. And I think a good way to perhaps address that problem is to reinforce and to strengthen the national and regional IGFs. I think that they offer, they have great potential and offer a nice opportunity and forum to be able to at local and national levels and even at regional levels to be able to address these issues in a much more meaningful way with representation of all the voices. And then to make sure that there are mechanisms to bring those perspectives to the global sphere, and not only the IGF, but also other internet governance global fora. So that's the first thing. And to also respond to the issue about the unconnected, I think by creating an enabling environment for the flourishing of community networks, then we could be able not only to create much more secure ecosystems, but also to be able to bring the unconnected to the online world and be able to represent the reason to contribute not only to peace but also to social and economic development.
Thank you, Valeria. I think our last speaker will going to be Anja, please.
Thank you. I was just reflecting on something Jan said actually, where he said that there's been a rise in attacks and threats and actors, but they haven't seen the same increase in collaboration, at least not one that would yield real impact. And I've been on all sides of this equation for quite a few years. And when people ask me, so what are you, what do you do, I usually describe myself as a translator. And I do think that we need a lot of more translators in this space who can bridge these communities and ecosystems and disciplines, and we're not appreciating that well enough, the need for that kind of capacity. So I would hereby like to suggest that we develop a new course of techplomats or diplotechs, depending on how you look at it. But I really think that bridging communities is one important step to go forward, and to also rise or to increase, the number of impact initiatives that actually yields the change we want to see.
Thank you. So no more speakers. So I thank you for mentioning discipline, because I want to say that you as a speaker has been very disciplined. We have concluded on time, and this is something I can't believe it. 17 speakers, and we have concluded on time. So I will pass back to the chair of the MAG to close this session and the chair of the session. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And my comments, just as it were at the beginning, will be very short and simple, and then I will pass to the chair of this particular session. I'd like to thank all of the panelists, the participants, and the organizers for what was clearly a well-thought-out, well-organized set of presentations. Cybersecurity discussions have been on the IGF since its very, very earliest days. And clearly the issues evolve, they escalate, but the discussion's also evolving as well. One of the things we hear quite often, of course, at the IGF is that it's not a decision-making forum. But I think this forum also proves how important the discussion is. These issues are complex, they evolve, they're very nuanced, they clearly involve many different viewpoints, whether that's through the different stakeholders or equally regional differences, national differences. It takes time to unpack those. It takes time to listen and learn. But at the same time, we've seen real concrete actions come out here. While the IGF is not a place for those binding decisions, they do very clearly inform actions that are taken back to the local and national level, whether that's taken back through private sector activity or it's taken back through government activities, whether it's taken back through some of the IGF intersessional activities, such as the best practice forums or the national and regional IGF initiatives. there is clear action being driven from the discussions here. We are not robust enough as a forum to take binding decisions. We were not constituted that way. We are not mandated that way. That does not give any lesser value to the work that we do here and the discussions we have. So while respecting very, very much the call for more specificity, more outcome, I think that will evolve. We've had a number of discussions today that we said it's a process. We start with discussions. We look for commonality. We look where there's some agreement. We perhaps strike some norms. And ultimately, if appropriate, it may become policy or treaty. That, to me, is a clear, action-oriented process. And I'm glad, for one, that we actually give time to some of these very complex policy and regulatory discussions. I don't believe that fast policy necessarily equates to good policy. I think I'd like to just close very quickly by thanking Switzerland as the host country for doing everything they've done to not only facilitate this session, of course, but all the other aspects of this conference. It does take an awful lot, and it's come together over the last year very, very well. So with that, I will turn to Mr. Gruder to actually close the session with my sincere thanks for everything you've done to support this particular one.
Thank you very much, Lynn, for the kind words. And you've noted I've been very quiet up here. That's due to two facts. One, the debate was very interesting. And secondly, I knew in advance that I will have the last word. This session has made it very clear that we have many challenges with regards to cybersecurity. But also, I believe we all know that if we come closer to a normative framework in cyberspace, if we even could at one point agree on a normative framework, the rewards would be very high. And we should not lose out from our sight that what unites us all is that we want a cyberspace that is free, that is open, secure, and is used for peaceful purposes. And even though we might have divergent views on what are the priorities, where we should debate them, what exactly should be done, I think we also have some building blocks on which we can agree. I guess we agree that the multi-stakeholder approach is the right one. We agree that we need some voluntary norms of state behavior in cyberspace. We agree that more confidence-building measures will help to establish trust between states, and we agree that more capacity building is needed, especially for those states who do not have enough expertise to take part in these debates. And for my country, for my government, of course, all these building blocks have to be firmly anchored in existing international law. And even though the UNGG has not been able to agree on a report, I believe we were all agreed that existing international law applies to cyberspace. And as Marina has said, maybe we have to be more vocal as governments what we think how international law applies to cyberspace. What exactly do we mean when we say international law is applicable? And for my government, it's of course the UN Charter in its entirety, and we would of course put the focus on peaceful resolution of conflict. Of course, we would put the focus on the prohibition of the use or threat of force, but there, for the sake of being comprehensive, we would also say there is Article 51 in the Charter, which under very specific circumstances can be applicable. And then we have the international customary law and the principles of state responsibility and due diligence, which has been mentioned several times here in this fora. And it is an important one because it obliges states to make sure that if they become aware of or that they have to do everything to stop internationally wrongful acts emanating from their territory. And as we are in the city here of the Human Rights Council, just a few meters away, and of the founding city of the ICRC, I also have to mention the applicability of international humanitarian law and human rights. That's for us a given, of course. So while we should make our best efforts to find agreement and to find consensus on how exactly international law applies, I'm aware that these are difficult discussions and they might need more time. But we should then base our work in the future, I believe, on what we have agreed upon. And we have two very good reports in 2013 and 2015 of the UNGGE, and we should look into how we can make these reports and these recommendations much more operational, and that more states and more stakeholders are aware of these reports. I believe many politicians in Switzerland have never heard of the UNGGE. They have no ideas there are 11 norms. They have no ideas the OSCE has developed 16 confidence-building measures. I think there we have still a huge task ahead of us to make these building blocks of a normative framework, so to say, more known. And as I said, capacity building, much more can be done here. Daniel has mentioned also with parliaments. I think that would be a good axis to work on. And confidence building measures, being transparent in your capacities, what you have, having points of contacts, exchanging information on your doctrines. I think these are important things, and in the regional fora, not only the OSCE but also in others, important work is to be done, and we should continue to pursue that work. And how should we do it? Many have said it's a multi-stakeholder approach. Someone in another panel has said we cannot only make the GP responsible for our own health. I think it's a collaborative effort. And the IGF, of course, in our view, and it is also with this conviction that we have organized, and we were willing to organize this IGF because we thought it's such a good forum to bring all the stakeholders together, to have a bottom-up approach in organizing these meetings, and to find a common way forward. And in this regard, I would particularly like to thank the proponents of this meeting, the ones who have suggested it, and so in such an able way have moderated the discussion. And I would also like to thank all of you here present for the very interesting contributions you've made, and also for the very interesting questions. Having the answers ready will take some more time, but we still have many IGFs to come. Thank you very much.
Please, a group photograph. Yeah. Of the speakers. Yeah.